Epilogue. The emergency room of the hospital was in the basement after Kilgore Trout had the stump of his ring finger disinfected and trimmed and bandaged. He was told to go upstairs to the finance office. There were certain forms he had to fill out since he was from outside Midland County, had no health insurance, and was destitute. He had no checkbook. He had no cash. He got lost in the basement for a little while, as a lot of people did. He found the double doors to the morgue, as a lot of people did. He automatically mooned about his own mortality, as a lot of people did. He found an x-ray room which wasn't in use. It made him wonder automatically if anything bad was growing inside himself. Other people had wondered exactly the same thing when they passed that room. Trout felt nothing now that millions of other people wouldn't have felt automatically. And Trout found stairs, but they were the wrong stairs. They led him not to the lobby and the finance office and the gift shop and all that, but into a matrix of rooms where persons were recovering or failing to recover from injuries of all kind. Many of the people there had been flung to the earth by the force of gravity, which never relaxed for a second. Trout passed a very expensive private room now, and there was a young black man in there with a white telephone and a color telephone. I had to pause for a second because Kurt Vonnegut died after a fall from walking his dog. I had to throw this in as a reader's note. So I hadn't noticed. I've read this book before and I never noticed that many of the people in the hospital had been flung to the earth by the force of gravity, which never relaxed for a second. I thought I would make a footnote here to that. Kurt Vonnegut died after he was walking his dog and he tripped over the leash. Another funny thing about that was when somebody read Kurt Vonnegut's letters after he passed, he was telling someone about how he kept having a nightmare that he was killed by a dog, and essentially he was, because it was from walking that dog. Here's a small musical interlude so we can get back to the reading. Trout passed a very expensive private room now, and there was a young black man in there with a white telephone and a color television set and boxes of candy and bouquets of flowers all around. He was Elgin Washington, a pimp who operated out of the old Holiday Inn. He was only 26 years old, but he was fabulously well-to-do. Visiting hours had ended, so all his female sex slaves had departed, but they had left clouds of perfume behind. Trout gagged as he passed the door. It was an automatic reaction to the fundamentally unfriendly cloud. Elgin Washington had just sniffed cocaine into his sinus passages, which amplified tremendously the telepathic messages he sent and received. He felt 100 times bigger than life because the messages were so loud and exciting. It was their noise that thrilled him. He didn't care what they said. And in the midst of the uproar, Elgin Washington said something wheedlingly to Trout. Hey man, hey man, hey man, he wheedled. He had had his foot amputated earlier in the day by cash drawer miasma, but he had forgotten that. Hey man, he coaxed. He wanted nothing in particular from Trout. Some part of his mind was idly exercising his skill at making strangers come to him. He was a fisherman for men's souls. Hey man, he said. He showed a gold tooth. He winked an eye. Trout came to the foot of the black man's bed. This wasn't compassion on his part. He was being machinery again. Trout was, like so many earthlings, a fully automatic boob when a pathological personality like Elgin Washington told him what to want, what to do. Both men, incidentally, were descendants of the Emperor Charlemagne. Anybody with any European blood in him was a descendant of the Emperor Charlemagne. Elgin Washington perceived that he had caught yet another human being without really meaning to. It was not in his nature to let one go without making him feel in some way diminished, in some way a fool. Sometimes he actually killed a man in order to diminish him, but he was gentle with Trout. He closed his eyes as though thinking hard. Then he earnestly said, I think I may be dying. I'll get a nurse, said Trout. Any human being would have said exactly the same thing. No, said Elgin Washington, waving his hands in dreamy protest. I'm dying slow. It's gradual. I see, said Trout. You got to do me a favor, said Washington. He had no idea what favor to ask. It would come to him. Ideas for favors always come. What favor, said Trout uneasily. He stiffened at the mention of an unspecified favor. He was that kind of a machine. Washington knew he would stiffen. Every human being was that kind of a machine. I want you to listen to me while I whistle the song of the nightingale, he said. He commanded Trout to be silent by giving him the evil eye. What adds particular beauty to the call of the nightingale, much beloved by poets, he said, is the fact that it will only sing by moonlight. Then he did what almost every black person in Midland City would do. He imitated a nightingale. The Midland City Festival of the Arts was postponed because of madness. Fred T. Berry, its chairman, came to the hospital in his limousine, dressed like a Chinaman to offer his sympathy to Beatrice Kienzler and Kilgore Trout. Trout could not be found anywhere. Beatrice Kienzler had been put to sleep with morphine. Kilgore Trout assumed that the arts festival would still take place that night. He had no money for any form of transportation, so he set out on foot. He began the 5-mile walk down Fairchild Boulevard toward a tiny amber dot at the other end. The dot was the Midland City Center for the Arts. He would make it grow by walking toward it. When his walking had made it big enough, it would swallow him up. There would be food inside. I was waiting to intercept him about 6 blocks away. I sat in a Plymouth Duster I had rented from Avis with my Diners Club card. I had a paper tube in my mouth. It was stuffed with leaves. I set it on fire. It was a soigné thing to do. My penis was 3 inches long and 5 inches in diameter. Its diameter was a world's record as far as I knew. It slumbered now in my jockey shorts. And I got out of the car to stretch my legs, which was another soigné thing to do. I was among factories and warehouses. The streetlights were widely spaced and feeble. Parking lots were vacant except for night watchmen's cars, which were here and there. There was no traffic on Fairchild Boulevard, which had once been the aorta of the town. The life had all been drained out of it by the interstate and by the Robert F. Kennedy Inner Belt Expressway, which was built on the old right-of-way of the Monon Road. The Monon was defunct. Defunct. Nobody slept in that part of town. Nobody lurked there. It was a system of forts at night, with high fences and alarms, and with prowling dogs. They were killing machines. When I got out of my Plymouth Duster, I feared nothing. That was foolish of me. A writer off guard, since the materials with which he works are so dangerous, can expect agony as quick as a thunderclap. I was about to be attacked by a Doberman Pinscher. He was a leading character in an earlier version of this book. Listen, that Doberman's name was Kazak. He patrolled the supply yard of the Maritimo Brothers Construction Company at night. Kazak's trainers, the people who explained to him what sort of a planet he was on and what sort of an animal he was, taught him that the creator of the universe wanted him to kill anything he could catch and to eat it too. In an earlier version of this book, I had Benjamin Davis, the black husband of Lottie Davis, Dwayne Hoover's maid, take care of Kazak. He threw raw meat down into the pit where Kazak lived in the daytime. He dragged Kazak into the pit at sunrise. He screamed at him and threw tennis balls at him at sundown. Then he turned him loose. Benjamin Davis was first trumpet with the Midland City Symphony Orchestra, but he got no pay for that, so he needed a real job. He wore a thick gown made of war surplus mattresses and chicken wire. So Kazak could not kill him. Kazak tried and tried. There were chunks of mattress and swatches of chicken wire all over the yard. And Kazak did his best to kill anybody who came too close to the fence which enclosed his planet. He leaped at people as though the fence weren't there. The fence bellied out toward the sidewalk everywhere. It looked as though somebody had been shooting cannonballs at it from inside. I should have noticed the queer shape of the fence when I got out of my automobile. When I did the soigné thing of lighting a cigarette, I should have known that a character as ferocious as Kazak was not easily cut out of a novel. Kazak was crouching behind a pile of bronze pipe which the Maritimo brothers had bought cheap from a hijacker earlier that day. Kazak meant to kill and eat me. I turned my back to the fence, took a deep puff of my cigarette. Pall Malls would kill me by and by, and I mooned philosophically at the murky battlements of the old Kienzler mansion on the other side of Fairchild Boulevard. Beatrice Kienzler had been raised in there. The most famous murders in the city's history had been committed there. Will Fairchild, the war hero and the maternal uncle of Beatrice Kienzler, appeared one summer night in 1926 with a Springfield rifle. He shot and killed 5 relatives, 3 servants, 2 policemen, and all the animals in the Kienzler's private zoo. Then he shot himself through his heart. When an autopsy was performed on him, a tumor the size of a piece of birdshot was found in his brain. This was what caused the murders. After the Kieslers lost the mansion at the start of the Great Depression, Fred T. Berry and his parents moved in. The old place was filled with the sounds of British birds. It was silent property of the city now. And there was talk of making it into a museum where children could learn the history of Midland City, as told by arrowheads and stuffed animals and white men's early artifacts. Fred T. Berry had offered to donate $500,000 to the proposed museum on one condition: that the first Robo-Magic and the early posters which advertised it be put on display. And he wanted the exhibit to show, too, how machines evolved just as animals did, but with much greater speed. It's like an Elon Musk kind of a guy. I gazed at the Kiesler mansion, never dreaming that a volcanic dog was about to erupt behind me. Kilgore Trout came nearer. I was almost indifferent to his approach, although we had momentous things to say to one another about my having created him. I thought instead of my paternal grandfather, who had been the first licensed architect in Indiana. He had designed some dream houses for Hoosier millionaires. They were mortuaries and guitar schools and cellar holes and parking lots now. I thought of my mother, who drove me around Indianapolis one time during the Great Depression to impress me with how rich and powerful my maternal grandfather had been. She showed me where his brewery had been, where some of his dream houses had been. Every one of the monuments was a cellar hole. Kilgore Trout was only half a block from his creator now, and slowing down, I worried him. I turned toward him so that my sinus cavities, where all telepathic messages were sent and received, were lined up symmetrically with his. I told him this over and over telepathically. Quote, "I have good news for you," end of quote. Kazak sprung. I saw Kazak out of the corner of my right eye. His eyes were pinwheels, his teeth were white daggers, his slobber was cyanide, his blood was nitroglycerin. He was floating toward me like a zeppelin, hanging lazily in the air. My eyes told my mind about him. My mind sent a message to my hypothalamus, told it to release the hormone CRF into the short vessels connecting my hypothalamus to my pituitary gland. The CRF inspired my pituitary gland to dump the hormone ACTH into my bloodstream. My pituitary had been making and storing ACTH for just such an occasion. And nearer the zeppelin came. And some of the ACTH in my bloodstream reached the outer shell of my adrenal gland, which had been making and storing glucocorticoids for emergencies. My adrenal gland added the glucocorticoids to my bloodstream. They went all over my body, changing glycogen into glucose. Glucose was muscle food. It would help me fight like a wildcat or run like a deer. And nearer the zeppelin came. My adrenal gland gave me a short shot of adrenaline, too. I turned purple as my blood pressure skyrocketed. The adrenaline made my heart go like a burglar alarm. It also stood my hair on end. It also caused coagulants to pour into my bloodstream, so in case I was wounded, my vital juices wouldn't drain away. Everything my body had done so far fell within normal operating procedures for a human machine, but my body took one defensive measure, which I'm told was without precedent in medical history. It may have happened because some wire short-circuited or some gasket blew. At any rate, I also retracted my testicles into my abdominal cavity, pulled them into my fuselage like the landing gear of an airplane. And now they tell me that only surgery will bring them down again. Be that as it may. Kilgore Trout watched me from half a block away, not knowing who I was, not knowing about Kazak and what my body had done about Kazak so far. Trout had a full day already, but it wasn't over yet. Now he saw his creator leap completely over an automobile.